Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Samuels. I'm the Director of Alumni Programs at the University at Albany Alumni Association. Thanks for joining us tonight for positioning yourself for success during COVID-19. I'm pleased to have a great group of alums with us tonight to share some of their insights with you. Before we do that, I did want to just go through a couple of housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see we have a few tabs we're going to be using tonight. You'll see a chat tab. Please feel free to jump in there, share maybe where you're joining us from, maybe your class here, introduce yourself to some of our fellow alums. We'll also be using the Q&A tab tonight. So at the end of the evening, about 6:45, we will be taking your questions and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A tab and not the chat tab so that we make sure that we see them and we can get to them. So that's about it. So we're going to get started. As I mentioned, we've got a great group of folks with us tonight representing a variety of industries and backgrounds. I'm looking forward to some really interesting conversation from these folks. So I'm just going to briefly introduce them. Hopefully you had a chance to look at their bios before we got started. So if everybody can join us, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we have Chris Wessel with us tonight. Chris is class of 02 and 04. Chris is a partner with Staffagy. We also have Jonathan Mahar Saez, class of 2016. Hi, Jonathan. Jonathan is the Communications and Special Projects Officer for the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region. Chris Nolan is here with us tonight. Chris is class of 2014 and 2018. Chris is a technical recruiter with Genesis Consulting Services. Vincia Phillip is class of 2016. Vincia is a career coach with the University at Albany Office of Career and Professional Development. And last but not least, we have Fred Pulcinelli, who's class of 04. Fred is founder and CEO of Pulcinelli Public Affairs in New York City. And I believe Chris has offices Capital Region too, Chris, or Fred rather.
Yep, that's right.
Yes. Right. And then finally tonight moderating for us is Gina Valentino. Gina is class of 2014. She is a member of our Gold Committee, which is our graduates of the last decade. That is the group actually sponsoring our program tonight. So thank you to the Gold Committee for bringing us this program. Gina is editor of Westchester Home, an associate editor for Westchester Magazine and for 914 Inc. So she's a busy woman right now. So let's get started. Gina, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Chris, my first question is for you. This pandemic has changed traditional recruiting practices, with many businesses now utilizing remote hiring. As the partner of a talent management consulting firm, can you offer some tips for a candidate to excel in a virtual interview that might differ from an in-person interview? And how best can a candidate prepare for recruitment during this highly competitive time, whether in person or virtually?
Sure. That competitive component is very important to understand, right? On the one hand, remote positions offer a lot more opportunity, but with that comes a lot more competition. So, you have all these jobs that are available to you, but you're also competing against a larger group of people. And in a time where unemployment is high, you're in certain industries, you're competing with just a lot more people in general. So a lot of the usual interview advice, like traditional interview advice, holds true for starters. Make sure that you're on time, which pretty much means make sure that you're early. I would say that, video interviewing probably comes with more bumps than in-person interviewing. There's not a whole lot of gaffes that happen in in-person interviewing other than maybe a phone going off, which is, more or less excusable if you handle it gracefully. But when it comes to video interviews, it's just like when you do a presentation in a class or in front of a client. Something doesn't load right, something doesn't work, don't get frazzled. Don't, show them that under pressure you can handle it. Stuff rolls off your back. You know what I mean? Because that's just how work is, right? Everybody who's listening to this is graduated already. You already have some jobs. You know that nothing ever goes completely the way it's supposed to. So, roll with it. I would say that definitely take notes so you can show interest. So, that way they know when you're looking down. Me personally, when I'm talking to a client, for example, I'll regularly like hold my pen up just so that they see every time I'm looking down that I'm not like checking my phone. I am in fact like taking notes. I think that people appreciate it when you're taking notes, but I think it's also kind of important that they know that you're taking notes and not petting your dog or something like that. And the thing that it's a challenge for a lot of people when they reach the end of an interview is they're not sure what questions to ask about the company. A lot of times things got covered that they had already had written down. They're not really sure. It's kind of a faux pas to not have questions at the end, but what do you say, right? Well, you kind of have a unique opportunity to get a viewpoint into an organization's culture and how it's managed by asking them about what the last several months have been like for their organization and what it's like working there. Take a look at the person you're interviewing with. If they've been there for 10 years, say, hey, I see that you've been with the company for 10 years. Obviously, the last several months have been very different. What's it been like working there? How's the company managed it? What's the leadership like to work for? And you can get some interesting insights into the organization. Or you might find that person just recently joined, and if they joined during pandemic time, something attracted them there. So I would say, hey, I see you just joined a few months ago. What brought you there? So pretty much they're probably not going to cover a lot of that in their normal questions. So the likelihood is really high that if you ask them that, not only will you have a good question at the end of the interview, but it will also give you good information. Because some organizations have handled this well and some organizations have not. So I think their answers would be really telling. The only other thing I would say too is that just, again, they are, by and large, organizations are a little pickier just because of a larger pool of candidates. And I don't mean large pool meaning a bunch of people that are unemployed that are looking. I just mean large pool just geographically dispersed. So, I would customize your approach. I wouldn't just click on a bunch of jobs. I would make sure more than ever, I would customize your approach each time. If you think that takes too much time to do, then that company also thinks, well, you're not worth paying a salary to, right? So take a little extra time, do a little research, send them a personal message. After you apply, find the hiring manager on LinkedIn or figure out who probably is the hiring manager, send them a message, follow up, stand out. That's all I got. I'm sure others will be able to add to that.
Thank you so much, Chris. If anyone has anything to add, please feel free to jump in.
I guess I covered everything. Well,
So Fred, my question is for you. Entrepreneurs in all fields have been challenged by COVID, which you know well. Many have had to shutter their physical locations and have transformed their businesses to online models. And others have begun their first foray into entrepreneurship during this time with creative endeavors. As the owner of your own agency for more than 14 years, you have likely experienced challenging times yourself as well. What's your advice for entrepreneurs during this time?
Thank you. It's great to be here. I mean, you gotta put yourself in a position to solve problems for starters. Like right off the bat, you gotta stand out. A lot of great advice that Chris just said. I totally agree with a lot of it. You gotta do the little things right, of course, like be on time. If you don't do the little things right, you'll never get in the door. And then how do you stand out? And you'll be surprised if you put in a little bit of effort on the front end, you go above and beyond, do a little bit of research. You got to be better than everybody else applying for the same position that you're looking for. But, from my perspective, it's about really being entrepreneurial and solving problems. I mean, we're all dealing with COVID from our own perspectives. I mean, we're based in New York. We never left. We've been here ever since. I mean, there was a period of time where I maybe went outside of my apartment, 3 times in, 2 months or whatever it was. So I know all about what it's been like to operate, but really it's also been an opportunity in some ways, which sounds really strange. And from a public health perspective, it's been a disaster, but it really shook up the economic landscape, and a lot of big shots that were doing things, pre-COVID aren't doing those things during COVID, and there are new problems to solve, and there are new issues. And every client, no matter what the issue is affected by COVID, right? We're all now in COVID relations if you're in the public affairs and management and lobbying business like we're in. So, for me, it's about, I look for the people who figure out how to wiggle in and find themselves in positions to solve problems and show value. Everybody, we all know where we want to be. We got to keep it simple. Other than working harder than everybody and never sleeping, we got to look where are the actual people in the world that we want to work with. Like, what are the companies? Who are the people in those companies? Figure out how to get in and figure out how to show value. And that might mean, sweeping the floor for 6 months. I mean, whatever, just do whatever you got to do so they'll talk to you. And then if you're lucky enough to be in a position to figure out what their problems are, and if you're then even luckier to be in a position to figure out how to help solve them and show value, now you're creating relationships. So there's no magic formula. There's no like silver bullet advice. It's just, you got to hustle. You can't sleep. Social media, with all the information online now, I mean, there's no excuse. I mean, I feel like a dinosaur compared to, a lot of people here. I mean, I graduated in 04, 05, depending on who you talk to, like right around that time. But, it's being entrepreneurial. We got to look at the landscape, and we're all in the Northeast, we're all in good places to achieve what we want, depending on whatever industry we want to be in. Chances are this is the place to do it. Right. So we got to figure out how to solve people's problems, but how to get access. I mean, you're not, even during COVID, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities from working remotely right now. We're all home, even though we're not really home as much anymore. Like, I've been going into the office a lot more recently. Over the last few weeks, we've been taking meetings. Like, it's weird. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a different ball game now. We're wearing masks, like everything's different, but we got to get back, and getting back is not a pretty thing. It's a strange environment, but we got to solve people's problems. We all, like, if you kept it simple, make your wish list for what companies you want to work with. Look at the people in those companies, think about what their problems are day to day, what they're working on, and just work backwards. Figure out how to reverse engineer it. Figure out how to get in with those businesses. It's not going to be a traditional means, and it's not going to be the same means that everybody else is doing. You might got, there's other ways to get creative, but even just participating in events like this, people meeting each other under certain circumstances, you'd be surprised what could happen. So I guess to boil it down, solve problems, don't sleep, and just figure out how to show value, where you want to be operating every day.
And if I could piggyback on what Fred's saying, as somebody who's been in business about the same amount of time as he has, one thing Fred and I have both seen is bad times and good times. And we've learned from bad times. We find opportunities. You look for opportunities. You go into survival mode first, but you don't stay in survival mode, or you'll never grow. You look for opportunity. And I remember the 08, 09 recession. I remember post 9/11, I graduated right after 9/11. And I bought my first rental properties and started my business right around the time of like 08, when like everything was plummeting, right? So this is a rough time, but it's a good opportunity to double down on your strengths. One of the things that I recognized, it wasn't fun while I was going through it, but in my business, we got more streamlined than ever during the tough times. And what's really nice about getting streamlined, I don't mean cutting costs like, cutting unnecessary costs. I mean, getting streamlined and being more efficient, because then when things turned around, I had some of my most profitable years because I had a smooth running operation. Because see, when things are going really well, you can be fat and happy and have, maybe not the best cost structure but still be making money. But then when times get tough, it exposes the weaknesses in your structure, right? So I'm not saying it's a good thing that this happened, but you can use it as an opportunity to really take a look. And not just if you have a business, it could just be individually. You could look at your own financial structure. You could be, I've had times where before I started my business, I had jobs where I was doing pretty well, and I was probably hemorrhaging money in like my early 20s. I guarantee you I was spending as much as I was making, right? And so whether you run a business or you have a job, when something like this punches you in the face, you can look inward and say, all right, let me rearrange a few things. And guess what? When you start ticking back up again, you're going to find that you'll reap the rewards of that. You'll keep more of that money, and like life will actually be better. So.
Thank you, Fred and Chris. Vincia, the job market is exceptionally competitive right now. Many have lost their jobs and they've applied to countless positions, and they've also received countless rejections. As a career coach, what advice do you have for keeping focused while searching for a new position and not getting discouraged?
All right, thanks, Gina. Thanks everyone for having me. So I just want to start with the fact that job searching can be so isolating, right? You're doing all of the work, you're updating your resume or getting it updated. So I just want to remind you that you're not alone. You are not the only one going through this process. So remind yourself of that. The other thing is it takes time. So I recommend pacing yourself. Everyone's job search or their journey is very different. So I'd hear from someone like, oh, someone got hired within a week or 2 weeks. Being mindful of everyone's process being different, but also now we're searching during a pandemic. So being mindful of those things so that you don't beat yourself up about it. Keeping track of where you're applying to is really important as well. You may get into survival mode when you're just applying to anything and everywhere, but being mindful that you can't, yes, quantity is great, but if you're applying to opportunities that you don't qualify for or aren't necessarily a good fit, that can make the process really daunting. The other thing I recommend is, you know, if you have lost your position, it's very strange to go from having a structured day to having a lot of unstructured time. So if you can set time to do your search and set some small goals as well, right? So you may have some big goals, some big career goals, but setting small goals like I am going to talk to 2 people about my search or about this particular industry, or I'm going to get my materials updated. Setting those smaller goals help to break it up a bit so that you can pace yourself throughout the process. And I also say to get help. So you do still have access to great resources here. If you are a recent grad, then having some resources through our office. But if you've graduated beyond 5 years, then you have some resources as well through the Alumni Association. So get help where you can throughout the process so that it isn't discouraging because you're talking to people. The other thing is to pay close attention to where in the job search process those rejections are happening, right? So if you're not getting interviews, then you need to look at the materials that you're submitting, right? Are you using one resume or one cover letter for multiple opportunities? Because that's a big no-no. It's going to be really important that you target those materials to the opportunities that you're looking for, because those positions and those roles are very different in what your responsibilities are going to be, what you're going to get out of those roles. So if you write one cover letter and submit it to multiple opportunities, professionals can tell, recruiters can tell, that employer can tell. So being mindful of that. The other side to that is if you are getting interviews and you're not getting callbacks, right? Something's happening in that interview process. So being mindful of, you know, things that you're saying, are things that you're saying red flags, or the things that you're doing with your body weird in regards to like not being in a good setting, things that are going on in the interview process. It's really mindful to pay attention to those things as well. You can use mock interviews. Those are really helpful. Those are services that are offered. Big interviews are a really good tool where you can record yourself interviewing and play that back so you can see those things as well. The other thing is to be mindful of whether your job search is only reactive. So a reactive job search is just you applying to Indeed, you know, applying on Handshake and Career Shift and waiting for someone to call you back. And if your job search is only 100% reactive, then you are going to be waiting. It is really important that you also create a blend for your job search to make it more proactive, meaning that you're going to be networking and talking to other professionals, whether it's a mentor or a specific person in your industry. And that's really going to help you to break things up a bit. If you do have time, volunteering is also a great way as well to sort of break up the process in any way that you can. I know that this is a pandemic, so that may look a little bit different now, but if you can, that's a great way to put yourself in a space with other professionals that may be in the industry you want to get into. It helps you to give back so that you're taking your mind off of job searching as well. So I encourage that as well. And talk to other people. I mentioned this before, but it's very important that you do that. I know that the process of losing your income or work has a level of embarrassment or discouragement or all those things, but it's good to talk to other people, whether it's a mentor, professional staff, or family, so that they get involved in that process, but also help you to stay accountable for those small goals that you're setting.
That's really awesome advice. Another thing I would throw in there to keep you from getting discouraged when it comes to applying to postings is to understand kind of what's happening on the other side. I love the breaking it down by stages, by the way. That's awesome for isolating where you can develop. There are some things that are out of your control, a lot of things. One of them is that job boards, unfortunately, have a habit of recycling postings, whether the employers know about them or not, because they're in the business of selling job postings to other companies. So the more postings that they have, the more resumes that they have, the better it looks for them. So a lot of times jobs will get refreshed that are actually pretty old or got filled. It sucks. It's kind of hard to tell when that's the case, but just remember that because there's like junk like that out there, it dilutes the number. It means, yes, you do have to reach out more often, and you have to get, to Vinci's point, you need numbers, but you need good numbers, right? Like you need to try each time. But there's also another unfortunate thing that happens, and I know Chris knows all about this because I know the type of work that his firm does. A lot of organizations will collect resumes for a period of time before they decide to start applying to people. It's unfortunate because you are like, hey, I applied, I got great skills. Why aren't they calling me like today, right? Because that's the thing that's foremost on your mind. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, they're, you know, and I still talk to clients sometimes and I want to smack them in the head when they're like, oh yeah, well, let's see what comes in over the next couple of weeks and we'll take a look at them like next Friday. I'm like, no, that's not, no. So like Chris is nodding, he knows, because yeah. So there's things happening behind the scenes that have nothing to do with you personally, and in no way should you take to heart, that are just simply systemic issues.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a number one thing, is not taking it personal because of those things going on. And that's why it's really important, like just keeping track of where you're applying to and when, right? So your expectations of when someone should call you back may look very different on the back end, you know, as Chris said. So yeah, don't take it personal. Because there's so many things that are going on behind the scenes as well.
Thank you both. That segues perfectly into our next question for Chris Nolan. As a recruiter, Chris, can you share some insider tips on how an applicant can make sure that their resume and cover letter is a guaranteed read? Are there key points, and if so, what are they, that an application should touch upon? What would a poor application look like?
Yeah, for sure. So the obvious first one is, when you have a resume, you know, look at the format, make sure everything's laid out properly, you know, make sure everything makes sense and where you're putting it. You know, everything has to have a spot and a place that makes sense along the resume. And I think too, one of the things that Vincia hit on, which I think is great, is the targeting part of it. Especially, you know, you don't want to throw the same resume and the same cover letter at every single company. You know, you really want to target it. I like to tell candidates when I'm talking to them, I say, hey, you know, when you're putting a resume together, you know, kind of think of it as writing a letter to a friend, right? You know, when you write a letter to a friend, you're customizing it. You know, you understand their values, their interests, you know, what they like. And that's kind of similar advice that I would give to somebody putting together a cover letter is, you know, make sure you look up the missions and the values, you know, what the company stands for, and, you know, really make sure that, you know, when you start the process too, make sure you're putting a plan together. You know, make sure this really is a company that you want to target, that you want to work for. Make sure your values align with that company. I'd say all those things are really important. Another thing too is, especially right now, with everything being virtual, having an updated LinkedIn, and even more than having an updated LinkedIn, make sure that you have the right keywords in your LinkedIn. Make sure, everything, all your jobs are in there, what you're doing. Because I can just tell you from a recruiter's perspective, that's one of the main ways I am trying to find candidates, looking to fill a job. And if you have those keywords, you have the right things in your profile, there's a way higher chance I'm going to find you, than if you don't.
I just wanted to add to what Chris mentioned as well. Knowing why is really important, right? Because whenever someone's starting their job search, I always say like, why this company, why this role? So going through and really looking at those qualifications, looking at those responsibilities and figuring out, why do you want to do that work? What is, why are you passionate about that? Because you won't be able to express this in a cover letter. And you definitely won't be able to express this in an interview when you're talking about those things, when they say, why this company, why this role, if you can't figure it out before you even start searching. So I think that it's very important to think about those things before you even sit down and start searching or preparing those materials.
If you want to get resume advice from peers, have people take a look at it, I'll offer a suggestion that sometimes gets overlooked. People will take a look and they'll say, oh, the formatting looks good, or I bold this, or I do. That's not really that. That's here or there, aside from like glaring spelling errors. Every resume has to be able to stand on its own, just because here's what happens. It gets separated from your cover letter. It gets separated from your ability to, like, when you're in the interview, you can speak to your resume, right? You can add narrative, but your resume is going to get pulled off and sent off somewhere. It's going to get separated, right? Ask the person who's looking at your resume, what is this resume saying to you? What's the story it's telling, right? So I had somebody earlier today, it was a daughter of a friend. I looked at the resume and I was like, I'm not sure what kind of job you're going for here. And I think that's a problem, right? And then after some chatting with her, we kind of figured out what direction she wants to go. We're like, okay, here's some of the things I would tweak. So ask whoever's looking over your resume, without you telling them what it should be speaking to them, have them look at it and say, what kind of job does it look like I'm positioning myself for, in your opinion, without any extra context? It's really valuable feedback, because remember, it's got to be able to stand on its own. It's got to be able to tell a story without you. So a lot of times people don't know how to give resume feedback because they're not used to it. So they just critique it. So you got to tell them the kind of feedback that you want.
Great.
Can I say one thing? To me, that's such a good question. Like, what will make a resume stand out? Words on a paper, it's all the same font, it's all the same size. Like, what is going to make those words stand out? And I've been thinking about that ever since whoever brought it up. And to me, not only do you customize it for every job, you got to take it 30 steps past that. The answer is, who's going to be the most customized? Like, whatever your background is, it's just like political messaging or any form of communications in the private sector. No matter what we're talking about, bring it back to what you want to talk about. If you ask me a question about baseball, I'm going to bring it back to seltzer water if that's what I want to talk about, because seltzer water will be the most refreshing for baseball players after the third inning on a summer day when it's over 70 degrees. So you got to, whatever your background is, relate it directly and over the top, not in a cheesy way, just in a tailored way, more than anybody. If there's 10,000 resumes and everybody's got the same name and the same school and the same date you graduated and the same internship, it's like, everybody's the same. So what can you possibly say that will stand out in a word form? And I think it's just, if I'm reading resumes and one jumps out at me like over the top, perfect. Like, every bullet point is brought to it in some indirect or direct way, because the whole flow of that document matters. That's standing out to me, definitely. If not because they're qualified, but because they took the opportunity to, like, spend an extra, most people spend 2 hours customizing, they spend 20 hours. Just you can't sleep and there's not enough time in the day to do all this. But I think the answer is trying to be over the top customized in everything, no matter what it was. A job you had 20 years ago, something you did at SUNY in one of the quads for money part-time on the weekends. Like, bring it back to what it is, because what do you have to lose? Like, how can somebody hold that against you?
The other thing I wanted to add
no, go ahead. You go
sorry.
first.
The other thing I wanted to add to that, because when I'm going through bullet points as well, people want to figure out what they want to put in there. I always say, ask yourself, what skill do you want the employer to know that you have, right? And if you're going through each bullet point and you don't know what that is, then we're going to get rid of it, right? Or we're going to think of a way to reword it so that you are including the things that are relevant to the employer. So it definitely goes back to what Fred said about going in and saying, this is the story that I want to paint with, the picture that I want to paint with this resume, and I want it to highlight these things. And you can do that by putting in, a relevant experience section or a related experience and really bringing the eyes to that section. But it's really about those bullet points and going through and saying, what skill do I want the employer to know that I have, but also how have I done my work, right? To extract those skills and think about what tools you're using as well. So I think it's really important to take the time to do that, but also be mindful. I always tell people, have a master copy of your resume and then have those other customized ones, because you get so locked into having one page that you're like, it needs to be one page, it needs to be one page. And you may lose valuable information or relevant things because you're trying to get it on that. Have that master copy. It may be longer than a page, it may have more information, but when you're going in and targeting specific companies, that's where you're really going in and tailoring those things and putting on the relevant things on that resume.
I've seen some really good stuff buried at the end of a resume, and it concerns me because I know that a lot of that's not getting seen. And to Fred's point, I mean, this is an advertisement for you. This is a tailored advertisement targeted to a specific target market, right? People will sometimes feel limited to a construct because that was the Word format that they downloaded and it said education first and this and that. Well, guess what? There's not really any rule to what goes in what order, right? Yeah. When you graduate, does education usually go towards the top? Sure, it's the most recent thing that you did. It's a significant accomplishment. It's probably your most significant credential, right? But frankly, if you had a couple of good internships in school, I'd list those on top and then I'd list the degree underneath, because guess who they care more about? The internships, most likely, right? The summary, I've seen accomplishments buried at the bottom of a resume. I've seen like skills, really relevant skills. I've even seen sections called relevant experience on like the bottom of the page or the second page. So don't get too caught up in whatever format was in like a template that you downloaded, and think about, what do I want them to see first that's going to keep them reading? So you can have some great content like Fred's talking about, and if it's buried, they're never going to see it.
I always sorry to jump back in, but I always recommend not using templates, because sometimes you get locked into those subsections as well, and they may not even be relevant to what you're looking for or relevant to you, and then you feel forced to fill them out.
Yeah.
So open a fresh Word document, put in those sections that make sense. The obvious education, your experience and things like that, but there are a ton of subtitles that you can use to organize your resume so that your accomplishments and your skills aren't on the second page or aren't an afterthought. Because if I decide not to look at the second page of your resume, then I lose all that valuable information. So there is some relevant things that you may want to put on that first page if your resume spills over, but I would just stay away from a template so that you're not locked into those margins, locked into those subheadings as well.
I was just going to say, like, sell the person in 5 sentences right at the top, like right where you would, whatever the header would be at the top, like at the intro, like why you want the position or whatever. Just use that as an opportunity. If you only have this person's attention for 5 sentences, is there something that can be said in 5 sentences to catch them? Maybe they might not go through the whole resume, who knows? Or maybe you'll have an opportunity right at the top to say something quickly in some, like I said, 5, 6 sentences, 4 sentences, something short that captures their attention, that gives you a leg up. Like that, to me, like Chris, you mentioned advertising. That's invaluable advertising space, the top of a resume. Like you don't want to waste that on whatever. Like that's an opportunity to put 5 really crisp sentences together that are super customized, directly talking to whoever's going to be looking at that. I mean, that's what I would think. I mean, because you never know, you put a whole resume together, you need it. You need 3 pages. You need more than 3 pages. You only have 1, maybe more. Even like keep peeling the onion back. Maybe only have 1 paragraph. Look at it like that. If you can come up with 5 sentences of why you should work somewhere, that's a good use of space on that resume.
Keep them reading.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Jonathan, you're the founder of a program that helps provide individuals in the nonprofit arena with resources, support, and networking opportunities. So you understand the importance of leadership skills and creating connections. With so many in-person networking opportunities no longer being offered as a result of the pandemic, can you share with us some tips on how to network and create and maintain professional connections during this unprecedented time?
Yeah, thanks, Gina, and great to be here. I'm enjoying the conversation on resumes because I agree with everyone on formatting that. So yeah, networking certainly has changed, and for many of us whose job is responsible connecting to the community, or if you're looking for jobs and building connections, you're definitely changing how things do it as well. So, and sometimes, frankly, I'm kind of glad some of these networking events are canceled because then I can easily avoid some people I don't really need to see anymore, but then focus the attention on some of the folks that you do need to see. So I mean, the best way to first is directly reach out to people. I mean, email is probably the best way, just because you don't know if someone's in their office to really call and see if they're there or kind of connect that way. So reaching out and directly asking for a video chat meeting or a phone call, or if you are comfortable doing a safely in-person type thing as well, kind of the direct outreach is probably the best way, and just kind of thinking about what questions you want to engage with them as well, especially if you're kind of looking for a job. Definitely doing some of the informational interviewing of just learning about how their company is navigating, what are good things about it too as well, and how to kind of learn what the sector is kind of expecting. A lot of organizations right now are planning for 2021, especially given whatever financial aid might come through legislation or some election results and some other ways too. Like a lot of factors are still coming into play. So asking how that's going as well. I definitely also utilize the people that already, like ask people who they're connecting with and building on that too, to send introductions to help facilitate that. And if you're not comfortable just doing a one-on-one video chat with someone new, asking a friend or a colleague to join with you so that you have a little bit of a buffer to able to kind of join the conversation with them and kind of learn with that as well. And then sometimes, some of these virtual events, like now, you can go through some of the attendee lists and send some learn who's connecting there and follow up with that person and say, hey, I saw you attended this event. Would you like to chat and kind of debrief about it? Like what did you learn? What are some great takeaways and stuff like that as well? I know I attended some events and I saw people I haven't seen, so I would private message them and say, hey, how's it going? Like, how are you doing? How are you navigating things? And just building that chat. And then it's a good follow-up kind of connection for you to kind of connect with that as well. So, and lastly, I would, video chat is definitely a great option to kind of do that, either Zoom, Google Meets, or anything like that as well. But I've seen a lot of people have video chat fatigue. I know I'm on sometimes 7 or 8 Zoom meetings a day. So when I am asked to do another one about someone new or something like that too, I may ask for a phone call. So I usually ask them, are you okay with the video chat? Do you want to schedule it out or schedule some time to kind of navigate too as well? Or I know I'm going to be in my car at that time, so I'm not going to be able to do that as well. So kind of asking that first to kind of get them comfortable with what they're doing. So you're kind of connecting with them and learning what's going on with their current situation. But yeah, definitely a lot of different ways to build connections and still maintain that as well.
I know it was tough for me. The lack of in-person networking was a major adjustment because I have a very much a referral based business. I haven't ever advertised. It's always been word of mouth, or it's been, I worked with a company and the owner of that company introduced me to another one. And how I maintained a lot of those relationships was like the way we all did, right? I had lunches with people. I went to networking events. There would be networking events I'd go to where I'd have the opportunity to have FaceTime with 6 or 7 clients, not just clients, but also like centers of influence, people that people in your network that maybe you're not selling anything to or working for or whatever, but they know people and they like you and they refer you. I got a network just like anybody else. Whether you're out looking for a job, I still need new clients and things like that, right? I need to network with candidates to put at the companies I work with, et cetera. One thing that I found worked really well for me was I realized that my network maintenance was kind of waning after a couple of months, even when I was on Zoom calls and whatnot. And I realized that what got it back on track was I intentionally try to reach out to 2 or 3 people every day in my network that I wouldn't normally talk to in the course of my work, and reach out, say hi, see how they're doing. No agenda, just as if we were to bump into each other at like a cocktail hour at a networking event. If you don't plan to do it, I've found if you don't plan to do it, because it happened as a byproduct of the events that you used to go to or the things that you did, because those things aren't happening. If you don't plan it into your day and intentionally do some of those interactions, they won't happen. And then all of a sudden you look back, it's been 6 months and you're in the dust and you're like, why is it? And it's because you haven't maintained your network.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to jump to our final question so we can get to some Q&A questions. So if each of you can just give me a couple of sentences, a couple of thoughts on what tips you have for alumni for positioning themselves for success during this time.
Sure, I'll go first.
Thanks.
So I think my biggest advice, if we're talking about new grads, my biggest advice being number one, informational interviews are huge. Meet with people in the industry, meet with people, that have similar interests in you and are in similar jobs that you're looking for, because that can really help you position, see if, this is where I want to go, this is where I want to be. And my general advice to everyone right now, especially with everything being virtual, like I said before, LinkedIn is huge. Maintain that LinkedIn, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Maybe there's some people that friends, whatever, that are at a company you want to work for. So if you set that plan ahead of time, you might be able to target the right people, and that can help you do the right things in the long run.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, okay, I guess I'll go next. So one thing that I always want to mention, especially when you're starting a job search or changing wherever you are within your career journey, starting with some self-reflection or a self-assessment, knowing what your interests are, what your values are, what environment you'd like to work in. And I know that looks a little bit different now, with a lot of places being remote, and who do you want to impact? Starting with that is really important for you to really look at companies and start targeting who you'd like to work for or work with, or what problems you'd like to solve, as Fred had mentioned. The other thing is, there's a lot of advice about pursuing your passion, which is great, but you also want to be realistic. So doing your research, are there job openings in the field that you want to enter, right? Paying attention to what jobs are disappearing, especially now during COVID. LinkedIn and Handshake has great information on who's hiring now. So you can use those places, the Occupational Outlook Handbook to get, valid salary information as well. So while pursuing your passions, knowing what salary you're going to make, are you still going to be able to pay your bills? So that's the part where you really want to be realistic about that as well. The other thing is to not be comfortable. So if you are working and you're looking to change what you want to do, not being comfortable. So upskilling yourself, right? Thinking about ways that you can work on skills. Where are you falling behind? Can you collaborate and work on a skill while you are still working? And if you're not, thinking or considering a course that may teach you that skill so that you can venture into that new area. The other thing that Chris mentioned as well, Chris Nolan, and muscle, is to keep your network sharp. So it's easy for us to, when we're comfortable and we're good, your LinkedIn profile is kind of dormant. You're not keeping up with people because you don't need to, because you're working or you're good. But you never know when you're going to need someone, or even if you decide that you want to pursue a career where you have to continue your education, you may need people to write a letter of recommendation, right? And they don't remember you because you've never kept that relationship going. So being mindful of that and really genuinely fostering those relationships, because you just never know when you're going to, need that help or need a mentor.
So it's funny, Vincia mentioned dormant LinkedIn profile and whatnot. That kind of leads into my point, which we've been talking about standing out. We've been talking about, what's the story that your resume tells, what's the, what's the story your LinkedIn profile tells. You have a personal brand, whether you established it or not. Everyone does. Right now, you have a personal brand, whether you intentionally created it or it accidentally happened. So take control of it and craft the narrative. Make sure that when someone looks you up, that it tells the story that you want to tell, not the story that you don't realize is out there because you never looked. So like I said, you have a personal brand right now, every single one of you. Make sure it's the brand that you want it to represent.
Thank you, Chris.
I'll just say I agree with a lot of the points, but I want to bring back to a point that Fred made earlier, that kind of helping stand out. A lot of organizations, especially I'm mostly interacting with a lot of nonprofits, are in kind of a crisis mode, unfortunately, still. And the way you stand out is kind of marketing yourself as a problem solver for them, because some of them aren't really thinking about planning the future or kind of navigating things. They're focusing on the crisis because they can't handle certain things. And some businesses are still like that as well. So how you can come in and market yourself as a problem solver for them, whether it's helping adapt to new technology or helping engage your audiences digitally, and kind of making those kind of help stand out for you, so that you're kind of setting yourself apart from some of the other people that you're engaging with, so that you're more likely to say, oh, I can come in and I can solve this problem, I can do this too. Or, knowing kind of the needs of the organizations and the people that you're connecting with, so that you can easily come to them and say, hey, I know you're struggling to kind of engage your employees while they're all virtually and stuff like that too. Here are some great ways to do that digitally and safely. And I've helped manage some of that as well. So you're kind of knowing that and kind of understanding the needs of your sector and the businesses and people you need, so that they may not think twice about like, oh yeah, that's something we need, we can address that as well. So making sure your LinkedIn profile, your conversations, and your resumes are kind of addressing to those needs, so that some of these organizations who might not be thinking differently, and it might not just be busy at work, people are busy with like their kids at home all the time, or they have a headache and the school sent them home and now they have to dealing with their kids at home. So there's a lot of different changing dynamics for people. So knowing how you can easily solve their problems and position yourself well will kind of help you elevate kind of above other people.
Can I just add to that, Jonathan, you mentioned not-for-profits. To me, there's such a special place in my heart and in my business outreach strategy for not-for-profits. I've always worked with not-for-profits. All not-for-profits are looking for more help, more people, more resources, more everything. They're always understaffed, underutilized, everything. So even when I started my business, I don't know, I was like 24 years old, nobody would hire me. Finally, 6 months later, I found my way across a museum, which was a not-for-profit. And I just said, put me to work. I said, you don't have to pay me. Just let me know what you're doing, what your lobbying agenda is, and put me to work. And that's how it started. It's always not-for-profits. The doors are open. So you can look at not-for-profits online. You can see who's on the board of directors, and just get to the not-for-profit and just say, put me to work for a few hours. And you get to know people that way. Because like, we're talking, and everything in this world is hard, but this is not as hard to do as the majority of people think. And what I'm saying is, position yourself within companies you want to work with. It's hard, but it's not that hard. So boil it down, right? Figure out what you want to do. We all obviously figure out what you want to do. Then make a list of who's doing it. Who are the actual companies that are actually doing what you want to do? Like if you want to sell life insurance, who are the companies doing life insurance? If you want to do crisis communications, what are the firms out there that are doing crisis communications? You want to be in recruiting, who are the top whatever recruiting agencies in whatever city you want to look at? And then go the extra mile and don't just look at the HR people, look at the people who are at the top, look at the leadership, the executive management, board of directors, look at who these people are and like stalk them, not in a negative way, not in a pressure way where you're contacting them every day, but look who they are, figure it out. You can, if you watch them and see who they are and what they're doing, you can get to these people. You can figure out what not-for-profits the company likes to partner with and what they have going on. And you can go on their Facebook and just do the little things like that. And if you find out that such and such is, you know, the chief operating officer of some insurance company and you know who they are, you know their name, you know their company, you know their address, you know everything about them. If you just play the long game, like not everything's going to happen right now. Like not everything's going to happen overnight. Play the long game. And the long game is not even that long. It might be a few months. It might be less. It might be 3 years. I don't know. I've played the long game in just because relationships have to organically and naturally come together. They're not going to just boom, come together overnight. That's why I say figure out a way to show value. Wiggle in. Next thing you know, 90 days later, you're showing up every Saturday or every Wednesday and Thursday night, or you're doing whatever. You're making phone calls. You're sending emails. You're making fundraising calls. A lot of times in not-for-profits, that's what it comes down to. You figure it out. Like we talk about networking, my first question is, are you going to the networking event or are you hosting the networking event? Like we host charity events all the time. I love it. It's one of my favorite things in business. Get all your clients together, all your business relationships, and you're reaching out to them with an invitation. You're not asking them for anything. You're not asking them for a job or for a retainer. You're saying, hey, come to this party. We're going to give 30% to, you know, the American Cancer Society or some kids charity in New York or in Albany or whatever. Like put a fundraiser together. Won't cost anybody anything but their time. So it just, to me, it comes back to figure out what you want to do, who's doing it, and position yourself in with those companies. We're in New York, we're in the Northeast, like there's no excuse. If we were in somewhere where you're 1,000 miles from the action, then that would be a lot harder to do. But you know, we are all smart, and you know, if we go above and beyond a little bit extra, you'd be surprised. So figure out who's doing what you want to do and become friends with them, but organically, not in a negative, underhanded way or in a cheesy way. Figure out what they care about and figure out how to help them get where they want to be.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you so much. So we have a couple of questions from the Q&A. We have, what is the best way to discuss a short stint at a job during an interview, whether it be a voluntary resignation or a termination? If anyone has any thoughts.
So there's a lot of other details that come into this, of course. I'll give you a couple examples. If there's someone whose resume has, 10 months here, a year and a half there, 13 months here, that's probably not going to get you a lot of calls. That's going to be a tough one to work around. But there are blips in people's career paths, right? Somebody looks and sees that you work somewhere for 5 years and then somewhere for like 6 months and then somewhere for like 3 years. Sometimes we take jobs that are just not a good fit for us. Right. And we realize that. And if you realize it sooner than later, it's actually a good thing than sticking it out at a place that you're miserable at. So, it's all in context, obviously. If you're literally changing jobs every 6 months, you got to take a hard look at yourself. That's a whole other conversation. But if you had a misstep, like pretty much everybody does, where you went to work someplace, you thought it was going to be something, it turned out to be something else. You can explain that without knocking the employer. You can say, and again, I'm taking a little poetic license here. This may not be the case, but you could say, I took this position. I thought it was going to be X. It didn't turn out to be what I thought it would be. The role wasn't quite what I expected or how it was portrayed. Nice people, good company, just not a good match for me. I found a role after that was better suited to me. Or you're there now. You've been there 5 months and they're like, why are you leaving? And you're like, I'm better at X and this job is Y. And I just would, good company, someone else would do great in this job, but it's just not the job for me. I mean, try to be objective. It's totally normal though, that all of us at some point or another end up in a situation that isn't what we thought it was.
Thank you so much, Chris. Any tips on how to negotiate a salary after being offered the job?
Well, so here's a bit of a pet peeve that I and a lot of employers have. If you've established what your salary expectations are, so there's a couple ways this could flow. If you haven't talked about money and they make an offer, that's one thing. If you have said, hey, I'm looking for 120K, give or take, depending on benefits, and then they offer you what you asked for, don't negotiate. You're negotiating in bad faith if you just try to squeeze a little more out because you read a freaking article that said you should negotiate afterwards. If you asked for something and they gave it to you, take it. If you didn't have specifics, if you're like, oh, best offer, or I'm looking whatever market is fine, blah, 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 and they come out with a number and you say, you know what, listen, I would, can we get closer to X? That's fine. You're in good faith. But again, if you just put it out there that I'm looking for X and they offer it to you, what are you doing?
Don't do anything to
and
turn the relationship off at that point. Like you're saying, Chris, if you are an employer and you're excited, you're going to make somebody an offer, or you think they're going to be happy because you're giving them what they want. I mean, you're going to make their life because you're about to, and then they come back at you. It's over at that point. You've stained the relationship. It's over. Maybe you'll get the job, maybe not, but you're not going to be the same. So so delicate. Choose your words so carefully. It's like Chris said, it could flow different ways. Every circumstance of that matters big time, but don't get cute. Don't get cute.
Thank you so much.
Fight for yourself.
Good.
Fight for yourself, but
Yeah.
do it the right way.
Oh yeah, if they lowball you, like if you said, hey, I need 120, and they're like, listen, here's 110, and you're like, it's totally reasonable to say, hey, I know when we first started these conversations, 120 is where I need to be at. I really can't make 110 work. Like that's different. Again, there's all these different circumstances. So if you ask for X and they offer you X minus whatever, yes, negotiate, point to what you originally asked for and explain, hey, I know I established at the outset, here's what I'm looking for. I really need to be at that number for this to work for me. Totally objective, doesn't have to be emotional, right? People get emotional about money. You just say, hey, listen, this is just the number that works for me. So yes, nudge back if they go lower than you asked for, but also be open to the conversation too. Say, hey, listen, I know it's a little less than I'm looking for, but I mean, if that's the highest you can go, what are some other levers here? What's your vacation look like? How much your health insurance? What's your health insurance look like? Because maybe the health insurance is cheaper than where I'm at now. Maybe we can make this work.
Great, thank you so much. So this last question will be our last. Our next question will be our last. We have someone who said that I was contemplating a career change before my position was eliminated in an organization restructure. Do you have any advice to help propel into that change rather than being lured by familiar positions?
Let's see. I think if you have a strong enough interest in that change and you immerse yourself in that world and just see nothing but that, you'll stay focused on it. Versus going back. If I'm understanding it correctly, it's I want to do something different. I don't want to fall back on what's comfortable.
Correct.
If you're looking at that career change as like an option or something you could do, then you're going to fall back to familiar. If it's the only path for you, it'll come to fruition. So if you surround yourself by that, that's all you read about, that's all you look into, that's the only people's LinkedIn profiles you looked at, it's the only jobs you look at, you'll go down that path. But if you treat it as an option, you will fall back on the familiar.
The other thing I want to add to that is that self-reflection piece that I mentioned, right? So thinking about why are you gravitating back towards that? Is it the tasks that you like doing? Is that the type of environment or industry? Because maybe you don't need to change everything all at once, right? It could just be the environment didn't work or it's not working. And in this case, it kind of resolved itself or dissolved itself based on those changes. But you may actually still enjoy that work. So maybe you're gravitating back to that because you do enjoy that work, but someone kind of forced you to make a decision. So thinking about that, but if you do truly want to embrace something new, think about those skills that you already have. Think about those transferable skills going into that new industry or new role, and how you can really use those to sell yourself as well. And look at any areas that there may be gaps or you may be lacking, to work on those to propel you into that new space.
Thank you, Vincia.
Okay, well, thank you all. I mean, this we packed a lot of information, I think, in to this last hour. Some great insights shared by this group, I think, as well as some really concrete tips and takeaways. So I hope you all enjoyed this evening. I really want to thank each and every one of our committee members and Gina for moderating. I appreciate you giving up some of your time this evening to share some of your insights with our fellow alums. And I hope to see some of you back for future episodes in our career webinar series. So have a good night, everyone.
You
Thank
as
you so
well.
much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.